Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Incubate, Accelerate, Ignite. I'm Courtney Hazley. I'm a member of the SEC's Small Business Advocacy team, and it is my absolute pleasure to be moderating today's panel on how entrepreneurial support organizations like incubators and accelerators support startups and founders. Following our panel discussion, we will be taking live Q&A, and we really look forward to hearing your perspectives. So to that end, if you want to ask questions live, just know that you have to be registered and attending through our platform so you can see the chat window. So to add some context for those of you who may not be familiar with the SEC's Small Business Advocacy team, or as we're formally referred to, the Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation, our office was created by Congress specifically to serve small businesses and their investors. We focus on finding practical solutions for small businesses and their investors. And we also have a unique focus on addressing challenges faced by minority and women-owned businesses, rural businesses, and those affected by natural disasters. Outreach is a big part of our office mission. And during our engagement with stakeholders, we hear a lot about accelerators and incubators and the role that they play. So this panel is a way for our office to explore this important topic further. It's a widely acknowledged fact that entrepreneurial ecosystems contribute significantly to the economic growth, development, and innovation of a region. And support organizations like incubators and accelerators play a critical role in helping startups grow and scale. But we also know that it can be challenging for founders to know when, where, and how to start seeking their support. In fact, our office's annual report most recently noted that approximately 76% of startups say that they experience challenges just finding support and resources. So we've gathered an impressive panel of experts today who will share their insights and experiences and help us unpack how organizations support entrepreneurs in various regions throughout the country. And you're going to hear for yourself. Our panelists today, they have been and are founders, investors, mentors, and coaches in their own right, and they are incredibly passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed and strengthening the ecosystems where they operate. Ultimately, one of the goals we have for today is to dispel some myths about incubators and accelerators, and we're also hoping to answer some frequent questions like, what are the key differences between incubators and accelerators? How do these organizations support entrepreneurs, and when is the right time to engage with one? Before we dive into the discussion, I do have to give a little bit of an SEC disclaimer and state that the views that I and my colleague Stacy, who you'll be meeting later on, the views that we express today are our own, and they don't necessarily reflect those of the commission, any commissioners, or our colleagues on the staff. All right, let's get started. Enough from me. I want to welcome our panelists, Gordon Doherty, Nikki Johnson, and Melissa Vincent. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'd love if we could just go around the virtual room, have you all briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the support organization you work with. Gordon, maybe let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm looking really forward to the discussion we're going to have today. My name's Gordon Doherty. I'm the co-founder and chairman at Capital Factory. Capital Factory's mission is to serve as the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. We work with all stages of startups. We work across a very broad spectrum of technology, including software, hardware, biotech. We have boots on the ground in all of the major markets in Texas, Austin and Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. We meet the best founders and the most promising venture scalable startups, and we introduce them to customers and investors and talent, while providing them mentorship from more than 200 mentors across our state of Texas. And one little factoid about Capital Factory is we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas going back to 2010. Nice to be with y'all.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nikki Johnson. I'm based in Birmingham, Alabama. I work at Generator, where our mission is to be the best partner for communities to invest in their best and brightest. I am the director of our Bronze Valley Venture Lab. In our Bronze Valley Venture Lab, I facilitate two key initiatives that are aimed at empowering underrepresented and under-resourced founders. I facilitate an 8-week accelerator for early stage founders, as well as a 6-week venture creation workshop for Alabama HBCUs. The foci for these two programs are focused on driving entrepreneurial growth through mentorship, networking, and professional development. Our Generator program is in over 32 markets, and a little later, I'll give you a little bit more detail about each of those programs and how they vary. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I guess I'm last. So I'm Melissa Vincent. I am the executive director for Pipeline Entrepreneurs. Pipeline is a fellowship-based program for high-growth entrepreneurs in Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. We call that the Midwest, but everyone has their own definition. We focus on serial entrepreneurs who are building high-growth, scalable companies, and we are industry agnostic. We're slightly different than what we're going to talk about a little bit later because we take zero equity in the companies we serve. So we like to say we're founder first.
Thank you, all of you. Well, one of the things I noticed in your introductions is obviously how different the three organizations already are. And so I think that segues into our first topic of discussion, which is that it's been kind of clear to me as we've done build up for this event and outreach and then listening to all of you, that there seems to be no clear definition or delineation between incubator and accelerator, and folks use those terms interchangeably sometimes. And while I would caution us against getting, too bogged down in the names, I think that there are some important and core commonalities and core differences between incubators and accelerators that I believe are probably worth unpacking. So I'm going to kick it back over to you, Melissa, first. And I would love if you could just share some of your thoughts on what you think typically distinguishes an incubator from an accelerator.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. So absolutely agree that there's a confusion there for a reason because we do little bits of everything as ecosystem builders. But when you think about an incubator versus an accelerator, what I typically say to people is it's really about a couple of key differences. So an incubator is going to help you when you are at that idea level. So early stage, you're not quite sure yet if you have a company, you're just trying to figure out, here's this idea, I'm trying to solve this problem that I found. You're trying to get to a place of having a viable business, but I wouldn't say that you have one yet. So we're really trying to get you there. And when you're going through an incubator, your resources that you're going to get from that are typically a little bit earlier stage. So more spread out. Let's say there's mentorship. A lot of times you see co-working spaces as an option there. Connections to funding versus actual providing funding. So it's kind of like we're going to provide you this support mechanism. And incubators typically don't take equity in the companies that they serve. So kind of one of the things about that category. When you think about accelerator, they're really there for those later stage companies that are really trying to grow and scale. So I've got an idea, I'm beyond the idea stage, I've got a company. I actually probably have a customer or two, and I'm really trying to get to that place of profitability and scaling quickly. So resources are typically a little bit more intensive for an incubator or for an accelerator rather than an incubator. And they often are like kind of there's a duration period there. So it's, 6 months, a year, 6 weeks versus an incubator, which is more about like, hey, here's this grouping of resources to help you get further. So when you think about accelerators, they're really a lot of times also offering funding with the resources that they're providing. And because of that, they do typically take equity in the startups that they serve. So kind of like a broad, like one is earlier stage, one's later stage, one typically doesn't take funding, the other does. But we're all about trying to help get companies through that initial phase, growing, scaling their companies. And that's where that kind of like line gets blurred sometimes.
Yeah, I can see that. Nikki and Gordon, do you guys have any additional ads for any other core services or support or kinds of programming that these incubators and accelerators tend to provide or ways to distinguish them?
Yeah, I'll say one way to think about this is the four fundamental things that every startup needs over time: customers, funding, talent, and advice. But it doesn't mean they need all of those at exactly the same time. And just as Melissa just described, in the earlier days, advice and mentorship might be most important, because before you have a product to sell to someone, you don't put very much emphasis on acquiring customers, and you don't need much funding. And so when you think about the resources that accelerators and incubators provide, it probably should most closely match the needs of the founder at that point in their journey. If they are developing the business plan and trying to do customer discovery or idea development, then they need a lot of advice and mentorship. They need some education on how do you even go about doing that. If you jump later towards when they do have a product in the market, now all of a sudden they need customers, they probably need talent because they're building the team, and they need funding to support the financial needs of all of that. And so the accelerators need to provide resources that include introducing them to relevant customer prospects. Hopefully that's a value they can provide. Introducing them to investor prospects and things like that. So again, customers, funding, talent, and advice and mentorship. And then based on what the founder most needs at a point in time, the program or community they join, those are the benefits that they should be looking for or expecting.
No, I like that a lot. The 4 buckets are really helpful as well. I hadn't thought of it in that way. Nikki, what about you? And I'm asking because I know you mentioned at the outset that Generator in Birmingham is doing programs that maybe you might put more in the accelerator bucket, and then also programs that are like kind of squarely in the ideation bucket. And so maybe anything else for the kinds of offerings that you all provide in Birmingham to flush this idea out further.
I think what I'd like to say is when I'm talking to founders and they're like, Nikki, what's the difference between an incubator and accelerator? Melissa and Gordon did a great job. I don't want to add anything. I just want to add my individual 2 cents as it relates to the founders that I work with. When I think of an incubator, when I'm talking to them, I say this is like that first step that you take in flushing out the ideation phase. And then I always put accelerator, use the definition. What does it mean to accelerate? And so that's kind of like what I kind of coach them in thinking as it relates to incubator and accelerator. Take the actual definition for accelerate, and that's kind of like what the goal is when you're participating in an accelerator program. For that clear-cut time with the curriculum and the time commitment, the goal is to accelerate in whatever end goal that founder has, be it revenue, is it customer discovery, is it changing or enhancing their go-to-market strategy. So that's what I would add as my little 2 cents. But Melissa and Gordon hit the nail on the head.
Wow, that's perfect. I love it all. I think it's clear that there are so many flavors of support organizations, but the foundational commonality that y'all have articulated is trying to meet the needs of the founders. And so if we could build on that, I'm interested in exploring how organizations evolve and adapt to meet the different needs of like the entrepreneurial ecosystem that they sit within, that they're there to support. And what I mean by that is I'm guessing that at this point in Austin's ecosystem development, a bunch of startups in Austin, tech startups maybe, could need very different things from founders in Birmingham. And so I'm curious to hear y'all's perspective on the importance of these support organizations breaking the mold, right? Not being cookie cutter, but really being flexible and responsive to the unique needs of the founder community that they're there to support. So I'm going to shoot it back to you, Nikki, actually, because I think you'd have a lot to add from Generator's perspective and just how you've approached the role in Birmingham.
Awesome. So what I always like to start off by saying is Generator's mission in the work we do is really tied to partnering with communities to invest in their specific community to promote the best and the brightest. And the way that we do that varies across the markets that we have. At Generator, we have 5 product lines, but I'll focus on the tech component. So we have 3 distinct programs that we offer to founders in Alabama. As I stated earlier, I run a G Alpha program, which is an ideation workshop. And so in that particular program in Alabama, the goal is to create a pipeline starting with historically Black colleges and universities. Alabama has the highest concentration of HBCUs with 14. And so in that program, we focus on helping the founders kind of navigate ideation, validation, and then building that duct tape first prototype of their MVP or their minimal viable product. The second program that we offer in our ecosystem is an 8-week accelerator for earlier stage founders. And in this particular program, we kind of focus on the facilitation of mentorship in introductions and relationship building. And then finally, the last program that we have in our Alabama ecosystem is we actually have a 12-week investment accelerator. So Generator facilitates 7 programs across the state of Alabama from Huntsville to Mobile. And then we also have 3 specific programs that operate in the city of Birmingham. And so what we really want to leverage when we go into these communities across these 32 markets in nationally as well as internationally is being the best partner for the community. So we don't want to come in and say, hey, we know exactly what you need in Birmingham, or we know exactly what you need in Cincinnati or Houston. We really want to work with that partner organization to do like a needs assessment. What goals are your community looking to meet? You know, is it economic development? Is it building a pipeline? Is it introduction to ideation entrepreneurship for some of the under-resourced communities? And so we work with them to create programs to facilitate to that end, to meet the goal that they have. And so specifically as it relates to Bronze Valley, their mission is to work with under-resourced and underestimated founders. And so we have created programming to hit those 3 components. So an ideation, early stage, and then thus an investment accelerator.
I love that. I love like the diversity of that approach and having those 3 buckets. And it sounds like Generator doesn't have the exact same 3 programs in every city where y'all operate. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And I think what you said about creating the pipeline of startups from the HBCUs, it like just dovetails with what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Like you're creating, these ecosystems are so important to creating businesses and helping innovation and development of the region. Gordon, Capital Factory has been around for a long time, like you said. Have you seen it change and adapt as like the Austin startup scene and the Texas startup scene in general has matured?
For sure. For sure, it's the case. Most people in the startup and tech early innovation scene would know about Austin now, but I've lived in Austin for 31 years, and I can tell you from experience that it hasn't always been that way. Austin for many decades has been a tech hub, meaning big tech companies have been in Austin going back to the 1950s and 1960s. But we were fortunate because of that foundation that our startup scene got going earlier than a lot of other places in the country. But there's been dramatic changes from the 90s to the 2000s and to the last decade. Capital Factory started in 2009 as a summer bootcamp accelerator, and then in 2012 took some physical office space to create the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Austin. And that was about 12 years ago that we opened the space, but we were the first co-working space in downtown Austin just 12 years ago, believe it or not. And we were the first accelerator program in downtown Austin, the only other one being affiliated with our local university, the University of Texas. So I joined then, and so I've seen a lot happen since founding the first co-working space and accelerator in downtown Austin to today in 2024, where Austin is somewhere on every top 10 list, it seems like, often in the top 2 or 3. And what I'll say is the entrepreneurial support organizations for each community mostly need to adjust and adapt to the specific needs of the community, which means they need to be appropriate for the maturity level of that ecosystem. Because of Austin's success, I do spend a good amount of my time advising ecosystem participants from other parts of our country. I've spent time in Memphis and Kentucky and the state of Rhode Island and Northwest Arkansas, in Chile and Argentina and other places that want to accomplish something kind of like what's happened in Austin. They know Austin from a long time ago, and like, how did this kind of hippie college town turn into a thriving startup ecosystem? And I love telling the story, but I will say that even Capital Factory has evolved a lot. In our early days, we were around co-working and mostly incubation. We had to work helping founders develop business plans. But as funding kept coming to our city, the funding follows the startups. So as we bred startups that had exits, that became more attractive to investors. And as investors came, more of those founders would become serial entrepreneurs and grow their companies bigger. And so today, just to fast forward, I would say that Capital Factory, we still work with startups at all stages, from just past the blank sheet of paper. But at the other end of the spectrum, we now work with some very mature startups, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, putting a lunar lander on the moon and walking humanoid robots and advanced biotech and really amazing things. But it's only partially a reflection of what Capital Factory has done. It's the maturity of this ecosystem has enabled that, is the way I'd say it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've heard a lot about other hubs trying to, or wondering, how do we replicate Silicon Valley? How do we replicate that success? Or even, as you pointed out, how do we replicate Austin? And it's the wrong question, right? It's not, how do we do what they did there? It's like, where am I now? What does my community need? Where are my founders? What are the resources that we have? What partnerships do we need to nurture and develop to build it kind of organically? And everyone's path will be different. And it sounds like the smart support organization is the one that's really attuned to those differences and adapting.
That's right.
Melissa, I want to put you on the spot because I want to hear from you too, because pipeline is different, right? You said it at the beginning, you're founder first, you're in the Midwest. The program doesn't take equity. I think it's a year-long program. So I'm sort of curious, in this vein of flexibility and responsiveness, why did Pipeline structure its programming and resources that way? What about the locality or the needs of the founders made Pipeline exist in the form that it does?
Oh, I love this question because I love having a panel that has different regions represented, because again, you can't replicate what's done in one area in another. And Pipeline was born out of this, need that was seen in the Midwest, starting in Kansas, we were losing all of these amazing entrepreneurs to the coast. So we weren't trying to replicate the coast. We were just trying to figure out, how do we stop this bleeding out of all of our amazing entrepreneurs who were leaving for access to capital, access to resources. And so in 2007, the state of Kansas got together with a group of people and said, what do we do? How do we change this? And the idea was founded on, if you bring the resources from the coast to the Midwest, could you keep those entrepreneurs here? If you brought them access to funding, if you brought them the people who were leading companies in Silicon Valley and startups and all of that, and you brought it here, could you home grow entrepreneurs and keep them from having to leave? So completely different take on that question, right? Why are people leaving? And because we focus on serial entrepreneurs, it had to be unique, because if someone fails, we were just as interested in them as a founder, because we wanted them to get right back up and start another company and create jobs. And so it really gave us this very unique vantage point to say, you can succeed or fail. We're with you as the founder, as a serial founder. And that has paid off for us over time. We're one of the few remaining, entrepreneurial support organizations that have been around that long, since 2007. And I think what's made us different, and the thing that I love about it, is because we don't take equity and we are founder first, we aren't there just for a year. So our programs, we have an earlier stage startup program called Pathfinder for untapped founders who have not had typical access to resources. So that's a year long. That should lead into our fellowship program, which is what we were always known for. And then we have membership, which is for life. And so we really have the entire continuum of care for entrepreneurs, because we are founder first. So I want to help you, kind of what we were talking about earlier is like those later stage companies. We have those still, and they're able to provide mentorship to earlier stage. So it's like we keep that entire community, investing in each other, and then continuing to grow the community in the Midwest. And it's just paid off in dividends. And now we have a very thriving ecosystem here.
I love that. Thank you. Before I transition to our next topic, I want to make a plug to the audience. Our chat looks a little quiet. Truly, if you have questions for our panelists, please lob them in. We will try to get to them later. And also want to encourage everyone to answer the polling questions. There's only 2 of them. I think you can find them at the bottom of your screen. All right, so zooming out, it's clear that no accelerator or incubator program are alike. And so doing your program, if you're a founder out there trying to figure out where to go for the support that you need, doing your homework, doing your diligence is really important. In the absence of a one-size-fits-all program, and thank goodness there is not a one-size-fits-all, founders should ask themselves, what, when you're thinking about growing your business, whether that's coming up with it, needing to develop it, or accelerating it, what are your priorities, and how much time do you have to give, and just what are you looking to achieve? I think to try to figure out how you find the program that best aligns with your needs, your company's needs and goals. So, Gordon, I guess further to that, what advice do you have for founders? I mean, we started this conversation with incubators, accelerators. I'm lost. There's so many different flavors. So knowing that there are all these flavors, right? What questions should founders ask to find the right fit for them? And can there ever really be a wrong fit?
It's a very important question. I can suggest that almost every founder should join some community, because starting and growing a great company is unbelievably hard, unbelievably stressful, fraught with lots of negative energy, potentially some, anxiety and depression. And so just joining a community of other founders, and if it's other founders that are working on things like what you're working on, that could be better. But that to me is just kind of a prerequisite as we think about then taking that to the next level of making a commitment to join a program. And when I say join a program, I'm assuming there's some give-take relationship, meaning the startup is going to have to give up some equity, or they're going to receive an investment that they have to give equity for. Maybe they have to pay for it in some other ways, I'm not sure. But now all of a sudden the stakes are higher than just joining a community and being part of that organically. And I think it's really important to ask the right questions and to make sure it's right for you. These programs, they carry requirements. In order to gain the value, you have to put some energy and make some effort. And startups are really hard to run. There's a lot of other things to do. So I actually do find a lot of founders that just think that one of the boxes they have to put a check in is, I have to join an accelerator, or I have to join a whatever. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but really do take it seriously. I wrote an article on whether or not a startup accelerator is right for you, and I'm going to drop that link in the chat, just because I don't have time to talk about everything that's in that. But the first thing is to go back to what I said before: is what do you most need at a given point in time? Do you mostly need advice? If so, then do the leaders of the program you're considering have the type of expertise that matches the advice you need? Do they have people that know your industry, your type of product, your technology? If you instead are looking for customers, does the program you want to join have access to the right type of customers? And do they have a track record of connecting founders to those customers? If it's funding, same thing, just fill in the blank. Do they have access to the type of investors that might invest in your type of startup? And because of the things that I just mentioned, most of these programs do tend to focus on a particular stage of company. They tend to have a certain level of required activity level. Some programs are very intense. You move to another city and you work on something every single day for however many weeks. Others are looser and they might last longer. You need to be realistic with yourself as to how much effort are you going to be able to put in. And then do reference checks. I tend to want to believe program leaders in terms of the value they can provide. But I think this is so important that you must find some previous founders that went through the program, not just the ones that the program leaders are introducing you to, because you're going to hear favorable things from them. But can you find a few other founders that they didn't refer you to, that you happen to somehow find out went through their program, and what do you hear from them? I hope it all checks out positive and that you never look back and that it's a great experience.
How often do you feel like applicants to accelerator and incubator programs are doing that diligence? Like are calling folks, and is it clear, like you mentioned, even, find out about success rates, or the kind of customers that they can connect you with in the program, the ones you need? Is that information that's readily, easily attainable? Or is this tough for founders to figure out?
Yes, some of it is out there. somewhat easy, some of it no. Usually it's talking to the program leaders and the people that conduct their program. But I think that founders, some of them just take it all on face value. And I mean, I don't mistrust the people that are running the programs. I just encourage founders to ask the next question. Oh, that seems really interesting. So you can introduce me to some customers. What kind of customers might you be willing to introduce me to? What kind of investors? Like, can you tell me an example of another startup like mine that you've helped in the last year exactly on that thing? Could you tell me a story? I do want to be careful what I'm suggesting here. I don't think most founders will be able to get a program to guarantee any results. Capital Factory is not going to guarantee that we will find your lead investor that will write a term sheet. We can guarantee that we will get you more meetings with quality investor prospects than you'll be able to get on your own. We cannot guarantee you'll get funded. We cannot guarantee our introduction to General Motors is going to land you a POC. So I encourage the founders to ask the questions and ask for some evidence to prove, but realize these program leaders, if they guarantee they're going to get you funded or guarantee they're going to get you customers, I actually would be skeptical of that claim as well.
I think what I'm hearing too is that it's a two-way street, right? And so founders ought to feel empowered and even, dare I say, entitled to ask the hard questions, because yes, they're hoping to get things from these support organizations, but they are, as you all have said, giving a lot of their time and potentially equity of their business as well. So I wonder if that's a position that some founders don't feel like they're in, but maybe a mind shift of sorts that we ought to encourage. And hopefully if you're listening in, you're getting that message that you have a right to ask these questions and it's important. Melissa, what about you? Any other advice for founders?
I was going to jump right in there because, so often I think that, when you're talking to a program, or you're trying to get investment, you feel like you're in a desperate place. You're trying to get something from someone else, which makes you feel like you don't have the ability to ask the tough questions. And this is your company. No one is going to take control of it unless you do. So what you have to feel comfortable with is representing your company and asking those questions, because there's nothing wrong with it. And if there is a program that gets upset with you for asking those types of questions, there's your red flag right there. Because any program that is doing great work is going to answer the questions. Now, sometimes it's like what Gordon said, there's no guarantees or anything like that, but it is the willingness to hear those questions, receive them, answer them. And for us, if it were me, and again, I was a founder, so I always want to talk to someone else who went through the program and multiple people, because of course the person who's running the program is going to be like, yes, it's great. You should absolutely do this. But I think talking to other people who've gone through the program, which you can typically find on the organization's website. So going to their website, seeing who some of their, stellar people are, connecting with them on LinkedIn, just being like, hey, I'm thinking of applying. We're, as founders, typically pretty supportive of each other. So it's an easier way to get some inside information is just by looking on the website, getting some connections on LinkedIn to maybe some founders that have gone through the program and just asking them what their thoughts were, especially if you're giving up equity. If you're giving up equity in your company, that's a big ask. You want to just make sure that the value is going to be there. And sometimes asking someone else who's done it and gotten value for it makes it worth it.
Wow, that's great. And Nikki, like in Birmingham, you've described Generator as running these three very different programs, right, at different stages. Do you find that like sometimes a founder comes to you and they have applied for one program, but they don't realize that they're actually better suited for a different one? Like, how do you handle this? How do you help them, navigate?
That is an awesome question that actually happened last week. So we have a Bronze Valley Investment Accelerator and we have a Bronze Valley Free Accelerator. You can't guess how many times a founder will say, I applied to your program. I'm like, I'm not sure you did. I don't see your name. Once I start asking additional questions, I say, oh, I realize that you applied to an investment accelerator. Let me tell you the differences. Because sometimes they don't understand the differences. They just saw an opportunity and they're like, I need help. Let me see if this fits. And alternatively, the managing director for our investment accelerator does a really great job of saying, hey, we received your application. At this point, you're a little bit too early stage for our program. However, let me introduce you to Nikki. And so sometimes it's just as simple as them not understanding the difference between the two programs, and sitting down, hosting some office hours, and just answering their questions about what the differences are between those two programs, and then telling them where they fit best. And saying to them, and right now might not be the opportune time for you to do this, but in the future or when you feel the need, please come back. And I always offer additional support. So if they say, hey, Nikki, I really want, some investment and your program doesn't offer that, totally okay. Let's set up an additional office hour. And let me tell you what the investment accelerator is looking for when you do your application and your pitch. Now, you still might be too early for them, but I'll support you in the best way that I can to get you a little bit closer. So essentially, it's answering the questions. And then for me, it's delineating between what the free accelerator offers and then what the investment accelerator offers.
I'm also hearing that you all and people like you are out there to help, right? So the first step, even if you're not sure, might be to just pick up the phone, send the email, ask the question, right? Start to make the connection. Yes, someone can tell you no, but it sounds like more often than not, someone's going to help try to navigate you through this process a little bit. I also hear from founders from time to time that they are juggling multiple accelerator programs, right? Maybe they're at the same time, they're back to back, and they're doing it for different reasons. Because we talked about how programs vary and they have different benefits. So maybe someone's doing one program for the name and reputation. Somebody's doing, they're dovetailing it with a program that's really focused on their industry. And then they're adding a third one maybe because, hey, that was free money. There was no equity investment at the end. It's a grant. So yay. What do you guys think about? What's your perspective on how common and advisable is that? And recognizing that it's also pretty time consuming for the founder to be doing it. I'll take that.
I don't have any problem with it at all. In fact, it's quite common for exactly the reasons you mentioned. At a different stage in the founder's evolution, they need different things. And I find that many times the first program they'll join might be local to them. They're getting plugged into their community. They're getting advice and mentorship and whatnot. Later, they get a product in the market with some paying customers. Their needs are different. So they might join a program that is really aligned with their industry or their type of product or their technology. The two of those together can be very valuable. I'll swing the pendulum a little bit further and just give you my instinctual reaction when I see a pitch deck and somewhere in the traction slide has logos of 5 accelerators the startup has been through in the last 2 or 3 years. My initial reaction, which could be wrong, is yikes, this founder's spending all of their time going through accelerators. Why aren't they out there, doing the other things? So there's a Goldilocks range, if you will, that might be really ideal and very explainable. Some founders might take it to the extreme. And I even wonder, did you join 5 accelerator programs because they each came with $25,000 to $100,000 and this was a fundraising strategy as opposed to gaining the expertise and value that you really need versus just the money? Are a couple thoughts I have.
Oh, Gordon, I hate to say that I agree with you because I think when we are looking at applicants, we will often say to ourselves, is that someone who is just going through, these programs just for the funding? And that may be the case. And that's the thing, access to funding. And I think you can see it in the poll results is one of the hardest things. And so it's that is a strategy, right? Whether it's one that we would advise is a different question. And depending on the company, so you see that. And I think being further down, seeing so many different companies, you look at that and you say, ooh, they're probably using that trying to get funding. And I think that's where, as entrepreneurial support organizations, it's on us to work with each other to say, when someone goes through our program, okay, what's the next resource for them? So we don't take equity, right? So if someone saw us on the list, that tells someone that they're a scaling, growing company. They may need funding. So one of the things that I love about some of the new EDA grants that are coming out is that they're forcing collaboration between ecosystem builders. And I think that's really important because the more that we're able to work together, then I think you're able to see that when someone's in one program, I'm able to then say, hey, if someone's going through an earlier stage program, then they're going to come right through us. And it becomes this, again, kind of continuum of resources versus when you see this choppy, everything that they're going through is like, it's 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, why aren't, like, to your point, do they have a growth strategy other than that? And so, it's a lot of it is really difficult when you're trying to get funding in your early stage, and it can be a red flag. And I think that's important for people to know when they're going through accelerator programs. And that's just coupled with the problem that there's not enough resources. So of course you're going to go through multiple programs. So it puts you in a really difficult position.
I want to pull on that thread a little bit, Melissa. You mentioned that the EDA grants kind of force a collaboration, a positive collaboration. Can you explain that and unpack that a little bit more for everyone?
Absolutely. So one of the things that, as when you think about the different groups, I mean, just even though we're not in the same regions, the three groups that you've represented here, if you looked at each of the, Texas, Alabama, and Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, there's so many different partners who are doing different things. And one of the things that I think is the biggest killer of innovation is when ecosystem players don't work together. When we don't collaborate, we shut down any ability for an ecosystem to actually flourish because we become the scarcity mindset around our resources. But when we open that up and we work together with the other partners that are in our region or across state lines, then what happens is when someone comes to us, they're getting the best of all the resources. So if an organization comes to me and through these grants, we're being forced to really collaborate and work together, hopefully it's not forced, but because of the grant, I now have a much deeper awareness of what all the other organizations are doing in my region. So when someone comes to me, you're looking at them across the lens of what everyone's providing and how does everyone meet that need, instead of that person being like, is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Instead, we're really looking at them and saying, oh, I can help them with this part. And another organization knows their part that they're playing. And because we're being judged on the fact of how well we're doing that, it forces this collaboration that I think when you look at Austin and some of the other areas, the reason why they're so successful, one of them is because there's a lot of collaboration happening and there's not this scarcity mindset. And I think the more that we can adopt that, not only do we provide more resources and better resources, I think it attracts more startups. I think funding comes with that. And so to me, a lot of times it just starts with collaboration amongst all of us as ecosystem builders to help startups. And that starts with helping them know where to go and at what point in the process and referring back and forth.
That makes sense. We've talked a little bit about the Goldilocks situation just in terms of funding or how many programs you might be juggling as a founder at one time. And I think the Goldilocks situation is there for timing as well, like trying to figure out when is the right time to engage with a support organization to help bring your business to the next level. I feel like based on what y'all have said, we know the answer to this question, but it was ostensibly, can you be too early or too late for a program? And what should founders think about being ready to provide and bring to the table when they start one? Nikki, I'm going to shoot that question over to you, especially because, again, you're running these 3 different programs at varying different stages. So what are your thoughts on timing and how founders should approach the timing of when to seek support?
I think that's a good question. I will say that Birmingham and our ever evolving tech ecosystem is honestly, in comparison to like Austin, we're still in our infancy. So we have this mindset of, and I'll say Nikki has this mindset, but I'll say Birmingham as well. The more the merrier, right? One of the larger initiatives in the state of Alabama is to grow economically. And the ways in which we do that is by deploying funds and programs and support for people who were pretty much really early stage. Because as I said before, the idea of tech programs and incubators and accelerators and other support organizations in the city of Birmingham and throughout the state of Alabama honestly began in about 2020. So, we're 4. And so we're really excited about welcoming all of the people who have ideas. so that they feel welcomed. We want their idea. We want them to plug into the ecosystem. We want them to meet people. We want them to meet people to say, hey, that's not a good idea. You should pivot. Or have you thought about going to Innovation Depot where there's a surplus of opportunities? Oh, you want to move to Birmingham? Well, there's this organization called Birmingham Bound, and their sole focus is to bring organizations to the city of Birmingham. So I think I don't like to tell founders they're too early or too late, because I think there's value in each of those stages and there's opportunities to learn. What I do encourage founders to do is ask questions. Is that particular program a good fit for where I'm at? Will I be welcomed? Is it a sense of belonging there? Because specifically in our programs for Bronze Valley, we're looking at under-resourced founders. So there's maybe a different set of questions that they might need to ask as it relates to wanting to participate in programming. But when I meet founders, seasoned or novice, I always say, hey, come along. And if you're not aware, I'll invite you to this event. Let's grab a beer. We have Taps in Tech every third Thursday at Innovation Depot. Come, let's have a free drink and let me introduce you to some people. So that's kind of how I think about it. We're very new, and I think everyone deserves a seat at the table.
I love that. Gordon and Melissa, do you have anything to add on timing?
I think she said it well. I think I don't like to put any rules on is it too early or too late, because I have so many examples of either extreme working out. So I think it's really up to the founder to decide on their journey and at different points how can they be most advantaged to help build a great company in a difficult environment.
I agree with that.
Fantastic. Well, I guess regardless of what phase a company is in and whether or not you have found your perfect accelerator program, I want to put a little bit of a plug in for our offices, Small Business Educational Resources. They're on sec.gov. So if you are a new startup and you're curious about the best pathway for raising capital, we have a funding roadmap as well as an interactive navigator tool. It asks you 8 simple questions and it helps direct you. We also have a glossary with accessible definitions for common terms in this space. So definitions for accredited investor and dilution. We just added new definitions for incubator and accelerator, very timely for our event today. And if you're a startup and you're further along in your journey and in your funding and you're already thinking about exits and going public, we have resources for that too. I could honestly do a whole show and tell about our offices, educational resources, but that is not our focus today. So I would encourage you to just go there when you have a spare minute. It's at sec.gov/capital raising. And I know my colleague Sarah has dropped that link into the chat. Melissa mentioned the polling, and we do have some updates on the polling questions. And one of them was, we asked you all to tell us about and to rank your biggest barriers to accessing capital. And the number one response was networks and connections to investors. And I mean, that is, well, one, it is a beautiful segue into the next question, but also it's a great recap of like one of the, I don't want to say the core value or resource that incubators and accelerators provide, but it's a pretty big one, right? Just this, giving you this community, giving you a place to ask questions, a place to know where to look, and to help you just feel a little less untethered, right? So I think that was the perfect answer to fit into today's conversation. While I'm on my soapbox raving about the office, I wanted to introduce and invite to the virtual stage our office's newly appointed director and advocate for small business, Stacey Bowers. I'm going to hand the baton over to Stacey for a little bit, and she's going to help continue moderating our panel.
Thanks, Courtney. And I just want to say thanks to Courtney and the OASB team for putting together this amazing panel, letting me come in at the end of the game and play a role in it. They've done all the work, but yet I get to come in and have a little bit of a role in it. So as Courtney mentioned, I'm the new director of the Small Business Advocacy Office. It's only my 4th week with this amazing group of people, and I'm thrilled to be here today with the panelists and the audience. So one of the initiatives that's really near and dear to me and something that I hope to focus on in my new role is the importance of mentorship opportunities. And I think we saw it with, how important it is with the poll question that just came in. And entrepreneurs and small businesses, it's a vital component to helping them, be a success. And so it dovetails into our last question for the panelists today before we get to the live Q&A. And that's, I've been listening to all of you, your insightful thoughts about the roles that incubators and accelerators play. And a piece of that is really providing mentorship and coaching for founders. So I want to just take a few minutes and talk about the importance of mentorship. And Melissa, I'm going to kick it back to you first. And I'd just love to hear your thoughts about the importance of fellowship and networks for founders and small businesses.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, first of all, welcome and congratulations on the new role. So for our organization in particular, being founder first, the biggest thing that I think we provide, even over access to funding, is the community that we provide. When you are, and again, I say this as a founder myself, when you're a serial entrepreneur, it's very difficult to find people that you can actually put that guard down with, be vulnerable with, ask honest questions, like where there's no dumb questions kind of situation. And, frequently, whether it's with our families, our partners, our communities, when you have a company, you have to have it all together. Yeah, I'm raising capital. Everything's great. Oh, nope, revenue's up. We're great. When reality is that's probably not the case, or at least not in the way that you're having to portray that. And so giving our founders a safe space is the one thing that since 2007 we've been doing, and it's the word that comes back and back and back, is community. We all need that. We need that safe place to be able to say when things are going great and cheer each other on, but also have the safe space when things are going well, and being able to also, encourage each other through that. And so access to that is something that was part of how Pipeline was built. But the beautiful way that that comes full circle is that community that we've built over those years is now over 225 entrepreneurs have gone through the program. And what's happened is that network itself has become mentors to, as each new cohort goes through our program, they're mentoring them by just showing up and attending events and being a part of the program. Like, oh my gosh, it's a new class. Let me help you. Let me mentor you. We're very intentional about creating that mentorship. But the other beautiful thing that's happened over time is those companies, because we work with serial founders, have now had multiple exits. So we have companies and founders who have had multiple exits. And here are they investing in that network. And so that is why that network and access to that network is so incredibly important, because if you are part of that network, all of a sudden now you have access to over 225 people who are a wealth of not just mentorship and resources, but also funding now. And so that's kind of that continuum of care that we've built, but having access to that is not always equal. We know it's not. And so that's a part that we've really started to work as an organization to build out programs for underserved founders who have not had access, because we know how valuable that access to that network is. So it's critical. It's critical for an ecosystem. It's critical for a founder.
Thanks, Melissa. It makes me happy to hear those numbers and to think about the circle of mentorship as well. So I'm going to pivot over to you, Nikki, and underscore the importance on creating community. It's critical for new founders, especially when they lack the right professional network. So in Birmingham, Generator 8, I totally messed that up, Generator, and Bronze Valley are primarily serving underrepresented founders. So we know from our own annual report this past year that 30% of African American and Black entrepreneurs and 22% of Hispanic and Latino entrepreneurs reported trouble finding professional support, advice, or role models in their network when starting and growing their business. And Melissa just told us a little bit about what they're trying to do, but can you give us your perspective on the importance of creating community, fostering mentorship, and some of the challenges you've seen for founders in your particular area working in Alabama?
Awesome. Thanks. And once again, welcome. We're glad to have you. So many of the founders, as I was stating earlier, in our ecosystem are very early stage, because the emerging ecosystem here is new. And so many of the founders have really awesome ideas and ventures, but to your point, they're very unsure of where they fit in the ecosystem, how to find and connect with the needed resources and or capital. And so here in the Magic City, which is Birmingham's nickname, we have grown a really robust entrepreneurial network. And so I think one thing that we do well in the city of Birmingham, not only across generator programs, Bronze Valley, and many of our other partners in the ecosystem, is we leverage our community partners, back to that collaboration piece, to galvanize connections across the city and state. Um, uh, Birmingham is very collaborative and welcoming. As someone who's from Ohio, I came here and people were like, we're going to get you connected. You're interested in tech. Have you met this person? There's a job here. You should go to this event. And I will say, here, one of the things that I'm always so proud to say is that in the city of Birmingham, I think we've never met any strangers. And I think that attitude is really paramount when establishing and maintaining a community. I think I said it earlier, we want the early stage founders as well as the more seasoned founders to feel welcomed and encouraged to sit at the table and feel like there's a sense of belonging. And my personal mission is to connect these founders to resources and opportunities. As it relates to mentorship, Generator operates 7 programs across the state of Alabama, 3 in the city of Birmingham, designed to connect founders to resources, specifically for under-resourced founders. And through our, very robust network, both nationally and locally, I think we're doing a really great job. As it relates to challenges I've experienced with the founders, either through my program or just through networking, the big thing that we mentioned is the lack of networks, of course, access to capital, lack of mentorship. One of the things that many of the founders who finish our G Beta and really are looking to go into investment accelerators or begin to raise rounds of funding say is that they are experiencing inequity in funding opportunities. And because many of these founders are not new in the tech ecosystem, many of them are still working as they're trying to build their ventures. So they say financial constraints is another challenge. And then sometimes they feel like there's a lack of visibility as it relates to being new to the ecosystem or a founder who doesn't traditionally receive the larger checks. So those are some of the challenges that the founders that I work with have said they experience.
Thanks, Nikki. I appreciate that insight. And I'm going to turn it over to Gordon. And I'd love to hear from you. I know coaching and mentoring is a big personal priority of yours, and you've been doing it during your extensive career. So is there anything that we can do to further foster strong mentors, especially for first-time startup founders, for diverse founders? Any thoughts there, Gordon?
We could do a whole session on mentorship. It is one of my personal passions. I tend to think that there are missed expectations of mentors by founders and vice versa. I think many founders think they can go to a mentor to get the answer, and many mentors think that their job is to give founders answers, and I believe that's a mistake. To my way of thinking, when a founder asks me a question, I do everything possible to not give them an answer. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the answer I give might be the wrong answer. I'm only getting 30 minutes with them, or maybe I've only known them for a month or two, and I'm going to deliver them the right answer for a really critical question. It's very dangerous, actually. Number two, there could be multiple right answers to the question. Many times the founder wants to know, should I go left or should I go right? And my answer is, you could build a great company going either direction. It's just the implications of going left mean you'll build the company this way, and here's some of the pros and cons and things you'll need to adjust and adapt to. If you build the company going to the right, a whole other set of scenarios, so they both could be right. And number three, my head after a mentor session does not hit the pillow with any stress or obligation for that startup. So who am I to give them an answer that now their head hits the pillow because they have to implement it? So I was trying to just also set the foundation for what is mentorship. And it follows the adage of teach a person or give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, teach them to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. So we we mentors, we need to foster and breed and develop mentors that can help founders learn how to fish. And so there are ways of educating mentors. There are a lot of mentors that are badass ninjas at a particular function or in a particular industry or whatever, but they don't know a lot of the rest of the needs of the founder, but they're really smart people. And so I run academies where I teach mentors a lot of the other things that I teach founders that the mentor doesn't know, because if they find themselves on an advisory board, primarily because they understand the healthcare industry, they are in a position, if they would learn some other things, that they could, be a broader mentor to those founders. So I think there is such a thing as educating mentors to be better mentors. These are the skill sets that founders need that could be also taught to the mentors. And then also just these best practices and tools for optimizing a mentoring session is something that we can develop mentors with, I believe.
Well, great. Well, thanks to all of you for sharing your thoughts there. And I hope I get a chance to talk to you more at another time when we're not on screen to get some more insight there. So I think with that, we're at the portion where we're going to turn to some of the Q&A from our audience. And I'm going to start with one of the questions that came in was, do any of the panelists dealing with equity investments work with crowdfunding portals like WeFunder or Start Engine to source more access to capital from investors within and outside the startup's local place of business?
Yes, it happens a lot. I see a lot of mistakes made. A lot of founders think that it's kind of an easy button. Hey, I've pitched 1 million angel investors and seed stage funds. They all said no. So I'm just going to list my offering on a crowdfunding portal and a bunch of investors are going to write me checks. And, hopefully it's not a big surprise that it's not near that easy. I mean, picking the right platform, preparing, it's as significant as like preparing a launch of the company. When you launch the company with marketing campaigns and everything, you better really think that through. You're going to spend time, effort, money. You got one shot to do it right. It's the same launching a crowdfunding campaign out there. Just because you put something out on a portal doesn't mean the investors are going to see it. So there are a lot of best practices. The best portals will give a lot of advice to the founders, and they do that because they want it to be successful. They want a lot of campaigns to be successful. So I would listen to the crowdfunding portal's advice. I would prepare for a lot of work. It's not a just, if we build it, they will come kind of thing. But I have seen really good success. And the last thing I'll say is there are some offerings that are better suited for that than others. If you're working on crazy deep tech, AI, biotech, blah, 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 nobody's going to understand it. But if you're building something that a lot of people can understand, like most consumers and therefore high net worth individuals that are also consumers can understand, those can be good candidates for crowdfunding portals.
Nikki, Melissa, anything to add?
I agree with that. I think it's just like trying to figure, unfortunately, it's going to be a similar answer. It's like figuring out which entrepreneurial support organization you should go to. There's not a one size fits all. And I think one of our jobs as entrepreneurial support organizations is making sure that we're educating on that. It's kind of one of the places we start with our Pathfinder program to say, there are probably more ways that you could raise capital than you're even aware of. So let's talk about all of them, because I think what happens a lot of times is you hear that venture capital is the way to go. And then it's like, okay, that's in my mindset. And that a lot of times does not make sense. So we spend that first time kind of debunking all of the myths and really talking about, what are the options that are out there? What are some alternative types of funding that you could do? And why would you do one or the other? It's such a nuanced, there's just reasons that you would do one versus another. And it really depends on the startup, where they are. There's so many factors. So I think that's where it's helpful to have amazing organizations that do this work to be able to ask those questions too, and dig in with you and help you figure it out.
Right. Thanks. Well, we've had a couple of questions about qualified small business stock. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gordon a little bit. And can you speak to that from maybe an an angel investor perspective or a founder perspective and why it's important?
Yeah, I'll give a disclaimer that I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. I don't work for the SEC. I'm a layman that has been around the block a lot with this issue. But I'll start by saying that founders that are building venture fundable, venture scalable companies must understand QSBS. It doesn't mean you need to understand it as well as your accountant or your attorney understands it, but you are likely to get asked a question by some angel investor or VC about QSBS. And if your answer is, what's that? Then you immediately have got some discredit. It doesn't mean you won't get an investment, but it's a significant opportunity for both investors and founders to avoid a ton of taxes. Founders that believe they're building a great company that could exit for a huge amount of money probably don't want half of all of that to go to the government. I mean, I love funding our government, but I don't want them to get any more than the rules allow. and I've seen founders build great companies and earn, let's say, millions of dollars at the end of that very difficult journey and have to give half of it to the government. Same with angel investors. Many angel investors have gotten burned as a result of that. They quickly learned about QSBS, and we ask questions. Hey, is my investment likely to qualify for QSBS tax exclusion? And so there are implications on the way you form the company, the type of entity you form as, the investment instruments you use in the early days, such as safe notes and convertible notes, have implications against the investor achieving tax exclusion. And so same thing with stock options. The stock options you grant employees and whether or not they exercise those stock options and actually own the stock has implications on all of this stuff. So I'm not going to go through the multi-part test of QSBS. I will just plead with the participants on this call, if they're building a venture investable, venture scalable business, to do the basics of education on QSBS.
Great, thank you. So one of the things we've seen in the Q&A is there information to connect founders to support specifically by location? And I know we've touched on this a little bit already, but does anyone want to add any thoughts on how to connect founders with investors?
I'll describe something that most founders don't think about, which is, why are you not introducing me to investors? So they'll join. I'll just use myself as an example, and I'll discredit myself if I need to. A founder learns that I and my business partners have made more than 500 investments, and that at Capital Factory, our investor relations team manages relationships with more than 1,300 of them across the country. We have lots of investors in our network, both personal and so a founder might join, and in my very first meeting with them, like, hey, Gordon, will you introduce me to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so? And these are either angels or VCs. My answer is no. Why are you asking? Oh, well, I joined Capital Factory. I thought you were going to introduce me to a bunch of investors. I'm like, look, and here's what I explained to them. If I introduce you to an investor, they're going to take the meeting with very high odds. This is the way it works in our industry. Investors take meetings when other investors they've co-invested with make the introduction. So now if I introduce you to that investor, my reputation is on the line. So if you go in there and do a really crappy pitch and you've got a not so buttoned up set of answers to their questions, it doesn't just look bad on you, it looks bad on me. And the next 5 introductions I try to make, I either get no's or I get like a 50-50. And that's terrible for me. That is the death of me for leveraging the network I've built over many, many years. So, and I'm telling this story just so founders understand that somebody like me or somebody that knows other investors, in order for them to introduce you, you need to be ready for that introduction. So don't be surprised if this gatekeeper is interrogating you and asking you a bunch of questions and, hey, why don't we meet another time? Why don't we dig in deeper on that? I want to make sure you have your fill in the blank together enough to meet with the investors I'm going to introduce you to. This is something that most founders don't understand, and therefore it's very frustrating. It's like, Gordon knows the right investor. He's the reason I'm not getting invested is because he won't introduce me. And that's not the case oftentimes. I'll get off my soapbox now.
I think your soapbox is a great one to be on. I'll just add my 2 cents. Sometimes founders think they're prepared for the introduction. And unfortunately, they might not have done their due diligence to properly prepare. And thus, to your point, you don't want to burn a bridge because the founder is unprepared. So I like to suggest to founders, before you get to the partner meeting, perhaps you should meet with an associate or an analyst to figure out what they're looking for in the pitch. Traditionally, what is the check size? Because I don't want you to go in there with an ask that's outside of what they're going to provide. Are there specific things that this particular investor is really important to them? Is it team? Is it traction? Is it ARR? Annual recurring revenue? Is it monthly recurring revenue? Let's prep so that when Gordon gives you this really awesome introduction, you knock it out of the park and you don't burn bridges for Gordon. To your point, founders have been, Nikki, that is not the way that I want to do it, but you kind of have to massage and have that conversation with them. Yeah, your venture is great. Let's prep a little bit more. Let's have a couple additional introductions. And then once we feel like you're at that point, Gordon will make that introduction for you. So I think everything you said was spot on, Gordon. Sometimes founders don't want to hear that initial no, but that later no will probably hurt their feelings more. So the first no, they should, for lack of better terms, suck it up.
Melissa, did you have anything to add onto that conversation?
No, I think that you guys both covered that beautifully.
All right, great. Thanks. So we talked a little bit about crowdfunding. Some of the other questions that are popping up from the audience is, are there some common grant programs, bank loans, other options that you're seeing investors use? And maybe also, what are they using before they walk in the door starting to talk to each of you? I'm going to put Melissa on the spot first.
You can always put me on the spot. So for us, and I'm going to kind of dovetail this a little bit with what the previous question was. So, I think that before you go get investment funding, I always like when someone comes to us and they're looking for a connection to an investor, I always give them a few tasks and make them come back to me with because they're showing that they're willing to take feedback and actually go do it. So I'll be like, you know what? Let me see your pitch deck. And then when they send it, I'll be like, oh, we need to adjust this, this, and this. And just kind of give them some advice, see what they do it. And if you're not willing to go back and forth with me, then you're certainly not ready to go with an investor. So I think one, when you're going into this process and you're trying to figure it out, know that it's not a one size fits all. There are so many different, kind of types of funding and everything else, but you have to be at a place where you're ready to hear and take feedback and quickly apply it and take it seriously. So for us, when someone comes to us, a lot of times in the past, they already were at a place where either they had been bootstrapping or they had done the friends and family round. So we were looking at seed Series A because we traditionally worked with companies that were much further along. When we started our Pathfinder program for earlier stage entrepreneurs, that's where we really got into people who are very, very early and haven't yet done a friends and family round, have really just kind of formed their company. So what we're trying to do with them is, and that's kind of why I was saying earlier, we started with funding as the very first thing. So what are all those options? How do you find out about them? I will say that there was SBIR funding that went out to each state. That's something that's been a great resource. So for us, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, there's additional funding that can be used by each state has given an organization that's kind of figuring out who to give that funding to. But that funding helps to kind of support other investors who are investing in different startups. So it's a really great time to be trying to get investment. Again, it's specific to more tech-based technology. It is state-specific. So there's a lot of resources out there, and I think that is what makes it so confusing. So a couple places that you can start is your state's website, because they do have that funding. And then they're also typically pretty aware of at least the top entrepreneurial support organizations. And then once you get into one, you can really start to work with who the rest are. And then there's a lot of different things, everything from going to banks. Some banks are much more entrepreneurial, so they're willing to take a risk and do a loan when maybe another bank wouldn't. So unfortunately, all I'm doing is telling you that there's like a different, every city, every region is different in the resources. So there's a lot out there, but if you start with those entrepreneur support organizations, we know regionally in our area who's doing what. So if you're not sure at all and you've Googled entrepreneurial support organizations in your city, start there and then work your way down. So that's honestly the easiest way to find them. And then once you get to one of them, they should be able to help you figure out who else to talk to if we're doing our jobs well, which I think we all care about entrepreneurs for a reason. So
Great. Thanks. Nikki, Gordon, anything to tack on?
The only thing that I would suggest, depending on where you are, so I work with a lot of students. And to that point, some students think they're ready for investments immediately. And I say, just 1 second. Look for the resources that kind of fit where you are. So if you're a student, there are a number of pitch programs. There are a number of programs that are specific to students. If you identify as a woman, there has, in the state of Alabama, that has been a push to increase the number of women entrepreneurs and business owners. And so there's a set of funding there. Are you a graduate of a PWI, a predominantly white institution? And some of those institutions have venture capital components where they deploy funds to alumni. Have you started there? There are specific organizations that deploy capital for HBCU students. So maybe if you're not as comfortable doing a Google search and like support organizations, maybe start where you are. If you're in the state of Alabama, what funding is available in the state of Alabama? Have you checked out Innovate Alabama or Alabama Department of Commerce? So that would just be my added 2 cents. There might be funds that you haven't thought about.
The only thing I'll add is many founders think that funding is their most valuable resource. In fact, I will ask them that question, what's your most valuable resource? And they answer funding. And after some interrogation that I'll skip for you, I help them realize that time is their most valuable resource, amount of time. We call it runway. We raise funding because it allows us to take the hourglass and tip it back over and have the sand move to the top instead of the bottom, because when all the sand runs out of the hourglass, unfortunately, we have to pack up our toys and go home, and that's not fun. So what founders need to think about is optimizing for more time. Funding is one potential source of time, but not the only one. So I encourage founders, get creative on inventing more time. When you convince 3 people to come work for your company for equity only, that just bought you some time that you didn't have to spend money on their salary. When you get somebody to give you an office for free, you just gained time. When you get free hosting credits with Amazon or Microsoft or whoever, you just gained more time. So optimize for time. Don't optimize for funding. See funding in its various flavors as just one method, possibly a very important one later, but only one method of gaining time.
Great.
that was
Well,
awesome.
thank you. Yeah, that was awesome. I think that's valuable advice to anyone, not just founders, thinking about time and gaining more time. So this has been an absolutely incredible conversation, and I enjoyed being a part of it. Before I turn it back over to Courtney for the lightning round questions and final wrap up, I have to do what we love to do at this office and just remind everyone about our incredible resources. You can find them at sec.gov/capital raising. And we really love to hear from all of our stakeholders. So don't hesitate to email us at smallbusiness@sec.gov. And with that, Courtney, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you. I have been sitting back and just taking note of all the notable quotables coming out of the 3 of your mouths. Like, the playback's going to be incredible. I've learned so much. I have to believe that folks listening in have learned a lot as well. So we'll wrap up with a lightning round, and I've got a couple questions to shoot your way. The first one is, do you think support organizations are inclusive enough? And if not, what can we do to help more founders? And that means women founders, diverse founders, founders with disabilities? What can we do to help them access these organizations and their programs? Open to anyone who wants to take the floor first.
I don't think most entrepreneurial support organizations are near inclusive enough. We have examples. Of course, we have one panelist here that is the focus, which is amazing. But most of the rest of us don't do a very good job. I think part of this is because our organizations, our entrepreneurial support organizations, have a role that we might associate with being a scout. The scout, they're out there looking for the founders, they're looking for the startups, they, kind of pitch the value of the program or the value of the whatever. And if these scouts are scouting for founders at demo days and meetups and all the standard stuff, they're going to find the same cross-section of founders that are already in our support organization. So I believe the scouts and the program needs to direct the scouts to be very intentional. If we want to be more inclusive, then that scouting needs to be very specific, very consciously form relationships and partnerships with other organizations where an expanded definition of the founder you might find is going to exist. Otherwise, you're going to end up right back where you've been for the last 5 or 10 years.
Gordon took my word, which was intentional. The way that I like to think about it is when you're recruiting these companies or the word being more intentional about where you're finding founders or looking for them. So if the idea is you want to grow your Latinx founder community, are you partnering with organizations where that's the focus? If your goal is to create a pipeline for college students, and maybe it's an HSI or MSI institution that is the focus, are you partnering with those institutions to bring awareness to the opportunities that exist? So to Gordon's point, being intentional and focusing in on the demographic that you're looking to partner with. If you're interested in people with disabilities, have you looked into intellectual and developmental research centers? They're nationally funded research centers across the United States, and many large Research One institutions have these IDCRs that are focused on individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities. So just being a little bit more intentional about the group of people that you want to welcome and find them where they are. Just remember, they're not going to come where we are. We're going to have to be intentional to go and seek them out.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Melissa, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think when we talk about ecosystems and how funding is scarce and that leads to sometimes like us doing this, when you think about the resources and the funding that's going out, a lot of times, even at the funding level from foundations, it's not going to organizations that are looking at meeting the needs of diverse founders, unfortunately. And I think part of that goes all the way back to the way that we look at impact. And if you think about the funding piece there, and we're like, oh, I suddenly want to have a program that meets this need of underserved founders versus is there already an organization that is doing that work that you could partner with versus thinking that you need to go in and solve that. Just that intentionality, again, not to reuse the word, but it's the most important word we could use here, being intentional to say, is there an organization that's already doing that I can partner with versus taking funding away to say, oh, there's this, it's just like what we tell our startup founders. Is there actually a need? Did you come up with is there really a problem there? And so if you're trying to meet a need, do the digging and make sure that there's already probably support that you're just not aware of, and then partner with those organizations, create trust, build community, and make sure that flow happens, because you'll have people that come into your program that you can refer and back and forth, and it creates this amazing cohesive community, and it's built on trust.
You mentioned leveraging support, Melissa, which is kind of leads me to this next question for you all, which is, are there educational resources that you all tend to provide to small businesses and startups and investors, and founders, that the SEC could help you provide as part of our educational suite, our educational tools, right? So can we help you? Like, can you leverage us? Is there things we could do in our office you saw a little bit of a taste, or you've heard a little bit of a taste for the kinds of educational tools we can provide, anything we can do to make your lives easier to help founders in your areas.
I think letting them know that this organization exists. If I were to go into my ecosystem and say, hey, have you heard of, I don't even want to say the office name because I might forget a word, and that's very important. But hey, I'm going to take this phrase and go to my founders. Have you ever heard of this organization? Many of them might say no. So I think one thing that I want to do, especially with that toolkit that we talked about, is introducing the resources that you have that are free, that are easily accessible, that can really walk founders through where they are. So I think that's one thing, is we could definitely do an introduction, and maybe even see how in the future we can partner to maybe do an additional panel where maybe it's founders that you're conversing with, or if you're interested in college students. I think there's a plethora of ways that we can engage, but the first thing I would want to do is make them aware that the resource is available.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders, citizens, don't know how to engage our federal government resources properly. It's something, federal government is huge. Like, where do you even start? So, many of them might start with a sister agency that starts with a letter S and ends with a B and an A, but some of them might start with the SEC. So I don't know the state admissions between the two and all the differences and all that. It's not something I've really cared about too much, but I would say that there are untapped opportunities related to government grant funding. I didn't know anything about it until the U.S. Army decided to put their 4-star general-led command called the Army Futures Command in Austin, and they live with Capital Factory, and I've been just enlightened as to how much money is out there, not for startups to go help our military build the next missile systems and tanks and all that, but for all the other stuff our military has to do. Our military essentially is the biggest company in the world because they have to hire people and they have to educate them. They have to relocate them and they have to house them and provide them medical benefits and move things around and like all the stuff. And so the Capital Factory portfolio companies have raised more than $750 million from non-dilutive grant funding just in the last 4 years. Before that, it was near zero. And so I don't know if it's a charter in all of the SEC or if that would be a way to kind of like engage founders and help them get to another, sister counterpart within the federal government, but it could be hugely valuable. And the last one, we touched on QSBS. That is one of a short list of 3 or 4 others in the category of kind of technical, geeky kind of accounting and legal stuff that I think most founders that are building venture investable, venture scalable businesses do need to understand in the early days. 83B elections, R&D tax offset programs. Those are things that if you don't learn about them early, by the time you learn about them, it's possibly too late to take advantage of it. So QSBS, 83B, R&D tax offset would be on my additional short list.
Helpful. Melissa, I just want to close it out.
Yeah, no, I love all the panels. I think that the work that you're doing around helping to make funding and, how do you understand the funding roadmap and all of that. But I think having that and realizing that it is a resource. And so having more of these where you have these entrepreneurial support organizations allows us to push that out as well. But I mean, the resources I wasn't aware of until we met. And now that I am, it helps us push out all the more resources that people just didn't know were there and helps us utilize them as well.
Well, that's perfect. There are a lot of resources out there and we don't all talk to one another. And I learned from you all about additional resources as well. Well, I know we're at the end of our time and I want to thank the stars of our show, you all, Nikki, Gordon, Melissa, thank you so much. You have been amazing. And thank you to everyone who has listened in, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And as Stacy mentioned, if you have questions, our office is always here for you. smallbusiness@sec.gov. Don't be strangers. Thanks so much, everyone.
I can